All right, let's jam. It's Freedom Phil. Like, subscribe. Let's get into it. Hey, turn up the video speed. What am I talking about this late at night? Well, just some thoughts. And I want to talk about how my mind kind of works. It's kind of a mathematical game that I play at times where it's like I just look at something from a numbers aspect. I don't know why. I just enjoy doing it. Like, for instance, you look up how much an ounce of gold was worth back in the year 2000. And if you had $100,000, how much would it be worth now? You know? So you look it up like it was like 269 or 270, and let's just round it up to 300. And then how many ounces of gold could you buy for 100,000? And then you times that, and you look at it and you think to yourself, uh, I could basically have this much, and it's passive, income type of thing. Little things with numbers like that. Or I look at like when people talk about buying a new vehicle. Why don't you buy a new vehicle? When I was trucking, be like, why don't you get a new vehicle? I'm like, because my old van runs just fine. And I'd say I don't really put enough miles on my personal vehicle to justify getting a new one. Like I could buy, like for the same money you paid for that vehicle, how much stocks could I buy? Or property? Could I buy some property, like raw land? I'm not a fan of houses at this point, just because like if I had raw land or a house, or like say I bought some land in the county and there was an old house and I could tear that down and then use the septic and the well, um, you know, okay, cool, yeah, I'm down with that. But this whole thing of having like you know grid problems of all that, all the cost of it, and you add up the cost on that. So I mean, we'll come back to the car thing in a second, but like you add up how much do you pay over the course of your life. Like I'm not really around my house a lot because it's basically a storage unit, but because I live have a house in a town, I had to pay a water bill, a minimum fee. It's 130 bucks a month. So you add that up and it's like what, $1,600 per year for water I mostly never drink. Because and they're like, why don't you just sell the house? If the market was right, I would. At this point, I'm kind of, I'll be one of those old guys in an RV when I get older. And they're like, that's sad. I'm like, no, no. Houses are overrated. I done a remodel on that house. We did a really good job on it. And I've realized houses are overpriced. They're overrated. And then you have to pay insurance. And the goal of the insurance company is to never pay you, to promise you something and never pay you. And how many times have you ever made a claim on your homeowner's insurance? I never have. And come December, come late December this month, it'll be 20 years I've owned that house. I've never once made a claim. So think about this for a second. Over the years of that much money paid on insurance, if I had bought how much gold over the course of my life, you know, how much more money would I have today? I'm just using gold as an easy example, or stocks or whatever. If I'd bought crypto, like, well, if we'd all known that Apple or Bitcoin was going to be the thing, okay, yeah, obviously, yeah. But the point of it is everybody understands that precious metals are still going to be worth something. I'm not trying to pimp them. I'm not trying to sell them to you, but it's just an example everybody can understand. If I buy raw land and then all I have to do is pay, you know, let's say land taxes for the western two lots that are connected is about $500 a year, and then add on top of that 220, I think, for HOA, which gives me access to the private beach, mudflat slash beach for clam digging. And then we have our own wells. And, so we're talking under 60 bucks a month for my rent to society, which is your taxes and your basics. As where, you know, insurance on a house these days can be anywhere from a small house like what I've got, 800 to 1200 or more, per year. So eight to 1200 versus 600 a year, or 700, so 60 bucks a month. I'm just saying. Then you add in the water bill, you add up that number. So we're talking let's just say if I have to pay someone to mow the lawn when I'm not there, because I make more, if I'm driving truck, I'm making more money driving truck than I'm saving mowing the lawn. But then I'm paying someone 50 bucks plus or more twice a month to keep the lawn mowed, so I have to deal with it. So we're talking, all in all, you add it up, and it's like there's $5,000 out the fucking door for just carrying cost for owning the property. Now, how much over the course of your years, if you had just had some raw land and an RV, and you invested that money, how much money would you have made in the stock market or in precious metals as well, like diversified, how much would you have made? Now take out, let's say, $700 a year for what it costs for my West Coast property. So still, it's $4,300. How much would you have made? Most people, don't put away that much money over the course of their lives. Like if you put $100 away a week, so we're talking $5,200, they say you'll have like a million something when you retire or something like that. But the point of it is that that's just money that passively just goes down the drains, and it's that bleeding number thing that gets on my nerves. Now, bringing it back to vehicles, the simple equation I've used over the years for that is, as a trucker, I don't really drive my personal vehicle that often. I drive, I get back from a run, a week or two run, so there's no real reason to rent a place, live in a place. The van or an RV is perfect for that. And by the way, I've seen a lot of companies that throw shade at RV owners. Like they're like, you can't store an RV in our back parking lot. We don't want no trashy RVs. And it's like, fucking, what do you care? But I mean, they actually got a little weird about your van. Kind of looks like, yeah, well, it's a van. It's not an RV. Technicalities. I mean, I'm doing the same thing. It's just, when I get back to the yard, the terminal, am I going to go and pay rent for a place? Oh, fuck no. No, I'm going to just grab my van, go do my laundry, go get my what do you call it? Go check my mail, maybe hit up the local pizza buffet in town. For 7 years, I worked at the same company. Do what I need to do. And then by the time my 34-hour reset, sleep in the truck, assuming the truck's not in the shop. And by the time that I'm done with my 34-hour reset, they got another load and I'm ready to rock and roll. Now, how many miles did I put on my vehicle that week for that 2-week span? Let's see, about 5 miles. Does it really make sense for me to buy a new vehicle? And then you add it up. Well, I wouldn't be, people have this attitude, I wouldn't be caught dead driving that. Well, what I fucking care? Like what people are like, well, people get that weird look. I'm like, look, dude, I buy a nicer vehicle. I'm still just an ogre of a man. It's like, hey, Shrek's driving a Cadillac. Do you think anybody gives a shit? No. The only reason anybody's going to care at that point is, hey, you've got money. How can I get this money out of you? That's it. So if I think about it from a mathematical mindset, how many gallons of fuel for, say, a brand new Sprinter van, empty, not even customized. We're not talking about a Travago or where you're like 150 grand or some fucking stupid. You remember when they costed that much? They might still cost that much. I don't even know. Winnebago Travago. Just buy an empty shell. And then I got to customize the inside myself and then put the solar panels and all that crap on there. For the price of that, now arguably it would be brand new and it'd probably last me the rest of my life. Am I getting this much better mileage? I get about 13 to 15 with my old van, unless I'm going up a heavy hill. And then who fucking even knows? I mean, but what type of mileage am I getting with that? Is it so epically better that it does make sense? Like those Ford Mavericks that get about 35 to 40. That's pretty impressive for a little pickup. And the technology is only getting better. Regenerative braking and all that. Like those hybrids. I'm liking that. I like where technology is going right there, man. By the way, for all the people that bitch about the modern society, no, we have it pretty good. You're just not structuring your life correctly. But if I buy that vehicle for, say, $50,000, how many gallons of fuel could I buy with that? And then how many miles would I drive? Now, mind you, I might only put some years, like going from here to the Rocky Mountain properties up there, you're talking maybe 1,500 miles a year, tops. Like it's only like 600 miles back up north to the Northern Command. The frozen command, I should call it that. As where if I go back to the West Coast property, I'd say not double, maybe double. So instead of 1,500 miles a year, potentially 3,000. Now think about that. How many years, decades is it going to take to actually burn enough fuel? Like for $50,000, how many gallons of gas could I buy? How many lifetimes is it going to take for me to ever use that much fuel? So at that point, you're like, it just kind of makes sense to stay with my old 88 Econoline that only, and here's another thing. What is the cost for insurance on that new vehicle? This is where you get into some kinky thinking, because you got to know these things before you decide to upgrade like that. You buy a newer vehicle or an RV or something. Are you spending more on insurance than you spend on gas in a year? Yeah. Another thought that I've had, like for instance, it would be cool to have a solar grid on top of a bus or an RV that's big enough to, recharge a little hybrid. But then you're like, how much of a grid am I going to have to build? Like, I'll build it myself. So, save on the labor. It's not really that complicated. And we'll talk about that another time. But how much of a grid am I going to have to build? Am I realistically going to use that much energy on a daily basis? I mean, when I go to an RV, when I retire, get one of those RVs where you could sleep above the cab, and then you have the back room and turn the back room into a gaming room, and then maybe have a gaming rig in there. So maybe do a channel where I'm either fishing or I'm gaming, one of the two, or just fucking around, smoking pot, rambling about shit. Basically, how much is it going to cost me to build that array? And then am I really going to use that much power? Because like, for instance, here, the TV only uses about less than 10 watts, and I have two solar systems on this van. One of them is a single panel, 100-watt panel with a charge controller and a old school lead acid deep cycle battery. And that produces all the energy I need for the TV. And it's also a little cleaner for the TV. I don't know why. Blue Eddy actually puts off a little more distortion in that respect. And then I also charge my phone and, little things like this. I don't really use a lot of energy. The main thing my second system does with the 2 100-watt panels is it's just there for the refrigerator, which only use anywhere from 30 watts to 50, depending on, maybe 40. So let's say 40 watts at max, for the most part. And I produce more than enough energy for that. And then once it gets to that certain time of the day where the sun's starting to go down, I just turn off the fridge because everything's already frozen in there to begin with. I use it as a freezer to make ice blocks and keep like blueberries frozen, just a few handful of things. The rest of it goes out into the coolers. I don't use a lot of energy. So if I built a bigger system, the only things I'd upgrade from that is I'd have an air fryer, maybe another fridge, another freezer, I got like a frozen 10 pounds of chicken in there too. But point is, for the most part, I don't really need that big of a system. So I need some way to use that energy. For instance, if I had a bigger system, more storage and all that, I would use it for maybe a gaming rig. Of course, if I kind of want to get a Steam Deck eventually, but like a gaming rig and all that. So I could see using that and a handful of other things. But once you have like anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 watts of storage, and you're doing, like, I would still do most of my stuff during the day. In fact, on an RV, I would probably put a wind turbine as well, just because I think it would be cool, maybe 2 of them. So, you got like all this, like around here, there's always kind of a breeze, and sometimes the wind gets fucking horrendously violent out here, to the point where when I prop my solar panels up on top of the van, I actually use the same strap that I strap them down with to keep them strapped against the van. So they're propped up, but when the wind comes along, it doesn't try to grab the panel and throw them around. Like they're actually bolted on to the van on a hinge, but still it could move. It's kind of crazy when it happens. So, basically, yeah, am I going to really use that much power? So it sounds really cool when you talk about it, to have like an off-grid system to where you could be powering up your car or something. And potentially, let's say you had a Prius or something, you could do that. If you had like a schoolie, like a school bus or a Greyhound or something with a huge array on top, you could be doing that. But then you think for a moment, most of the time, am I ever going to use that much power? Like, for instance, let me give you another example of ways you could use power. Like, you could actually have like a Sprinter van and have it covered with panels on top for the most part. And you have more than enough power there to power, all your power tools. Like, I got a buddy. He has a Makita everything, and he's got like I remember back when the idea of a battery powered chop saw was like, you fucking kidding me? Now it's normal. Hypoid saws, all that. So you get like two big batteries, rechargeable batteries, and the batteries recharge relatively quickly. So you could have a situation where you've got a lot of extra battery chargers and whatnot. So you got your nail guns, you got your saws. You could produce pretty much all the energy you need just from the sun. They're like, what if it's not sunny? You still produce a lot of energy even on a crappy day, but you just have a generator. So the handful of times that you actually need the generator, you just power up the generator. Ooh, and you claim that on your taxes, just like the van and everything. You could even put a bed in there in that system, and basically just use like, a gym with showers, get a gym membership. I could see a guy really cleaning up, a tradesman really cleaning up, doing that. And like, yeah, almost everything you have is like rechargeable. That would be a pretty sick operation. That you could do that these days. And so we are kind of in a wonderful glory era as far as things go in that respect. But when bringing it back to the whole idea of charging your car, mathematically, it's a waste of money and time. Considering that you can get like 35 to 40 for a small pickup these days off of a hybrid design. I actually really like that hybrid design where it's like regenerative braking, basically runs. It's got a small battery that it tops off, and then it's actually what we should have been doing decades ago. Like, if you really think about where these cars have gotten today, like they're more like a train. Like a train has a diesel motor that basically produces electricity for the electric drive. The electric drivetrain powered by a diesel motor produces it's like a power plant. Your car is like that now. That's genius. Now, I understand the desire to want to be fully off grid. But if you have to build a system that's so overcharged, so overbig, like other than the vehicle, you never need it, does it make sense? Now, how would I recharge a small thing, a little vehicle? Well, here's one. There's a guy in town back up the Rocky Mountain town. He's just got one of those little electric trikes. He's an old guy. He uses it to go to the bar, the senior center, and a few other things. And I've heard these vehicles can get anywhere from 30 to 50 miles, depending on the grade, your weight, all that stuff. So let's just say you lived right outside of town, like a mile or so or whatever, you could literally just use the solar on top of your van to recharge the batteries on your little trike and then go into town. So less mileage on your own personal vehicle. And then, less gas as well. That's where I could see that being totally fucking cool. But for the time being, as far as powering, your car, I just think it's more solar than you're going to realistically use for everything else. So it's a balancing act, mathematically, numbers-wise. Am I going to use... And people say, well, you could pump it back out to the grid. But then you run into the problem of this. If you're connected to the grid, how much are you paying per month to be connected to the grid? Like, am I paying an extra $20 a month to be connected to that grid? Well, then how much money, how much gas would that have been? How many miles of gas would that be? Well, let's say right now it's $3.50 a gallon, I think. $3.50, so approximately, well, let's see. Is that 4 gallons at $4 would be 5. So approximately little under 6 gallons. Now 6 gallons times 35 miles to the gallon to 40 miles, 35 miles to the gallon. Just for the hookup fee, just for the monthly hookup to the grid fee. And that's where you're like, it still makes more sense just to go with a hybrid and use gas than it does to have the electricity option. It's weird. It's like once you get into this mathematical mindset, you start to look at things entirely different. If you're going to be in a place a long time, like there's certain types of farming I'd love to do. I've always wanted to see people do aeroponic operations, build a huge humus pile for home heating, like someone build like a manure digester for making natural gas. But then it's kind of like, doesn't make dollars, doesn't make sense. That line of thinking where it's like, well, how much, for instance, having chickens, there's another great example. Chickens are awesome, man. But you have chickens or milk goats. You're basically married to the place. You can't just leave. And that's another thing. Let me give you a closing example. Online gaming. I remember the guy I told this to, he just couldn't comprehend it. I'm like, well, it's the cost of online gaming. The total cost, not the cost most people see, but the total cost, the opportunity loss cost is why I don't care for it. And he's like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I only pay I think it was something like $60 a month or whatever he pays for really good internet where he was at. And I can't remember what he was paying. This is a number of years ago. I said, yeah, but for that cost, how much am I losing when I could have made, okay, for instance, if I have at home high-speed internet, this is before Starlink was a thing and whatever that cost, and then can you claim it on your taxes as well, but all the same, if I have to be at a home, it means I have to pay for that home. It also means I have to pay for utilities. It means I have to pay for all these little things. And then how much money could I have been making driving that truck? If I drive that truck and I made $500 a day, then times that by 6 days a week, how much money is that? Then put on top of that, the money I didn't have to pay for rent because I'm living in the truck. I didn't have to pay for utilities. You had just add it up. What I'm losing by having that at-home internet connection is this huge fucking number. So given the choice between a game that I have to be online to play, and it might be an awesome game. Don't get me wrong. It might there's some games that are just epic, but I'm sorry. That's where the handheld console Switch, I looked at it and I'm like, this is a way better deal for me because the DS, for instance, I had a lot of fun playing those games. And I'll pull out some of my old DSs. I have two of them, because Pokemon trade between them. Dog, you snoring. It's funny. People think of snoring, they think of a pug. Well, that's a corgi and he's snoring too. But you think about that numbers game and you're like, the same thing with the Switch. I was playing Skyrim on Switch and it's just as much of a game as the original. In fact, I'll tell you the truth. I really don't need better technology than what was coming out in the early to mid 2000s. If you gave me Jak and Daxter, the trilogy, on a handheld, Symphony of the Night, I don't need perfection. And by the way, this is probably why Steam is way better because there's just tons of games, like a handheld console, Steam Deck or something like that. You can recharge it off 12-volt DC. I mean, I don't know if you can or cannot, but it would make sense that you'd have some option to be able to plug in your Steam Deck basically to a USB or something like trickle charge it or whatever, just like you would with a Switch. You look at how much I'm not paying in rent, utilities, and then you add up the number and we come back to how much gold, or if I was to take that money and put it in just something S&P or do a little investing. And then also the question, well, you could lose money in the market. Yeah, but you can also use the losses to offset your profits, which just like doing business, if you went out and bought new tools or bought a pickup truck for your business, a utility truck for your business, you can claim that. So, I mean, you look at the cost of what you're losing. This is kind of I got a relative, and I understand why he lives in the city because he's got a kid with some issues. And I'm like, dude, if you got $500,000 coming your way, just go buy a cheap piece of property, build yourself a little tough shed tiny homes, get yourself a Starlink or something, and take the rest, and you got enough money to be invested the rest of your life. He's like, yeah, but I want to be in the city, and plus my kids' issues. And it's like, I do get it. He can't handle the outlands. Yeah, he wants to be close to his friends, and I'm like, dude, just get a gas efficient little Prius or something. And I mean, look, I get the kid reason. That's the only reason I could kind of accept it. It's not my life, by the way, so it's not my, do whatever you want. But get the Prius and just go into town, visit your friends. It's like I've joked around, these people that got to live in the cities. Well, how much are you paying for that house in the city? This is another good example, not to keep going, but Your house, your $500,000 house at 6% is 30 grand poof the first year just gone. And then a little bit less than 30,000 every year incrementally until 30 years later you have it paid off. I mean, I'm sorry, dude, you're ripping yourself off. Just like with cars. Another great example with the cars is the new car with the, let's just say it's a $500 to $700 payment. It's pretty normal now. $500 payment for your car and then $500 for her car. So $1,000 a month for two fucking people movers because we want to look fashionable. And then effectively add in the higher cost of insurance for newer vehicles. You know, so we're talking at least $12,000 a year for the cost of the payment price, and then add another $2,000-$3,000 or more for insurance. Then add on $2,000-$3,000 for gas. Then add in if you have to commute to work. You know, like say you're making a poultry $25 an hour. I remember when I made $13.74, and that was like moving on up. And then when I left that company, I was making 17 something, and God, I can make almost like if I get a decent trucking company, like I'm making 65 to 70 miles, you know, I'm making $45 to $50 an hour. Then you figure in the benefits. It's like, oh, it's no rent, no utilities. But anyways, if you're making $25 an hour and you have to basically sacrifice an hour each way because you got to leave a little early to make sure you're on time, and the river of machinery sometimes slows down. So hour there, hour back, you've just lost $50 a day times, let's say 2 weeks off for vacation, so 50 weeks a year. So we're talking like 12,500 there, plus another 12,000 something in car payment, plus gas, and you're talking another 30 grand. So just between your house and your cars and your commute and all that shit, you've lost $60,000 of your life, of your work. As one guy was putting into it, I saw this short, and I'll try to close it with this. He was describing how society takes nearly half his beer money, referring to taxes as beer money. Like, the government gives me what for taking half of my beer money? I thought that was great. You know, it's just like, I looked at that and I'm like, yeah, that's a way to put it. You know, like if they weren't taking your money, you'd probably be spending it on something you want. And that would be stimulating the economy. Instead, you give your money so somebody in the ghetto or a trailer park can go out there and, you know, commit fraud with their food stamps and buy fucking drugs. And meanwhile, you got to pay for that. And you're like, yeah, be a producer, you know. And you know, I don't know. Sometimes when I look at society, I'm just like, between the drug addicts that can break into your house, or, you know, luckily, I got to tell you one thing about the Rocky Mountain State is it's one of those towns where everybody knows everybody, and if something goes wrong, everybody knows who did it. Like, you don't have the drug problems there like you do in the rest of the country. Not all the country, but like you get any reasonably sized city and you got some fucking creepers. It's kind of funny too when you like you go there and you're like, I don't think I tried to explain it to somebody like, you guys really don't know how this, like, it's really that good here. And I said it's funny because as much as I love the West Coast and all the food growing everywhere, it's just like you just don't leave anything, you know, sitting around, because it's not that it'll get stolen today, it just might be gone when you get back. You know, and it might even be not even drug addicts. It'd be like bored teenagers. And so you start to, by the way, that's another thing. What type of society can you build when you have a low trust society where you can't count on people whatsoever? And so if you're not investing into all this overpriced shit like housing, you know, building this, you know, McMansion and all that crap, because then it just feels like you have to protect your fucking fortress. What could you do with the rest of that money investing wise? And what could that money be doing for you? And much younger could you retire? But if you are going to live somewhere all the time, have you ever thought about the Midwest? The Midwest, Texas, something like that. There's old houses out there that you can buy for little if nothing, you know, and they might need a little bit of work. But if you're just like, you know, if you're a single guy and you don't need perfection, you're like, yeah, fuck granite, Formica's good enough for me, you know. Or, you know, you're like, you just throw in rental carpet. You're like, oh, the carpets look like shit. Tear them out, throw in some new rental carpet, you know, fresh coat of paint. A few things, do a lipstick remodel on your house. You're like, good enough for me. You know, improve the things that are actually essential. Maybe if you turn into a rental temporarily, you know, so you can claim like the furnace or something else. But put in a wood stove because fuck paying for heat, you know. And I just want to close it with this. As I've said, I'd close it many, many minutes ago. When I get an RV, I am putting a wood stove in it because, for instance, one of the places I'm thinking about moving camp down closer to the river, there's a ton of like where they fed the cows during the winter. So there's obviously like cow biscuits, like buffalo chips, bovine biocoal. And I could totally see myself heating my RV. Like if it gets cold, like, well, time to recycle some bovine biocoal. I totally would. I would. And if I lived in the Midwest, I would be all over that shit. If I could make like if I was going to live somewhere all the time, I would be making a bio like manure digester, and I would get all the methane gas I could out of it and use that for some sort of purposes. Like I had a dairy or a farm or just even cooking, or I don't care if I could, some way to fucking use it. And then after I'm done, the slurry that's left over could either be fertilizer or mixed in with like sawdust or some other crap. And then eventually you could turn that into burning wood pellets to be burned in like a thermal power plant. Now, here's what's kind of crazy, and this is where I look at the numbers and the mathematics and the science. Um, God, if you were to do a system like that, where you're recycling pretty much all the stuff, and then build the barns into the ground a little further so they'd be kind of self-heating, self-cooling. Uh, if you did a carbon capture strategy and then recycled the carbon into like a algae farm, where you're growing that green stuff that you can literally squeeze insane amounts of oil out of. In fact, all the oil is pretty much ancient algae. Ancient, like coal is basically ancient sunlight into plant life that compressed and made peat, and then eventually the peat compresses into a coal. And they actually, in Ireland, they cut peat bogs up, and they actually burn peat. They're burning ancient plant life in the same way that the algae farm too. So if you had, for instance, the cows that are producing, and you feed them some of that seaweed so they produce less methane, like seaweed supplements. It's better for their stomachs too. But you use the cow manure in the slurry in the biodigester to produce methane, to produce synthetic natural gas that could go to a power plant. And then you could use the leftover slurry either as fertilizer or to compress leftover, biomaterial there with some other stuff like sawdust or whatever, into pellets that could be also burned in a thermal power plant, and then capturing the carbon to feed to the algae farm, which is harvesting sunlight and then producing either food or, fucking energy, fuel. I mean, how many times could you redo this over and over again? And there's those type of mathematical questions. Like, how many times could you use the same carbon over and over again until it finally is gone, until you finally used it up? How durable is the carbon? How recyclable is the carbon? These are the thoughts that run through my fucking squirrel-like brain, my mathematical mind, where it's like, wait a minute. What if we do this, this, and this, and this? And there's been a lot of times through my life, I'm going to be honest. I know that there's only a handful of people like me, where it's like we can see the parts of the puzzle and we can put it together. Most people are just like, go to work, make paycheck. After white, black, what the fuck ever, whether it's the hood, the ghetto, or the trailer park. I'm just better at a redneck voice. And then go home, drink some beers, fuck my wife, make another kid, have to go back to work, pay for kid. That's most people. Then there's me. I'm looking at like, we could literally build this and this and that. We could literally solve the carbon problem. We could solve a lot of the issues worldwide. We could do it right now with the technology we have. And then everybody's like, dirt, what's that got to do with the sports ball? And I'm like, it's just, oh God, just that song, Common People, was done by the band Pulp Fiction, and it shows William Shatner. You look at William Shatner, Common People, and there's the light bulb up above, and there's him with his head in his hands doing the Picard, like kind of like it's like a double fist face palm, like it's just like, oh Jesus Christ. Yeah, I see all the potential and all the I look at the numbers, and I just Like watching the merry-go-round, watching the wheel go round and round. But then I see the average people out there, and I'm just like, oh God, too many common borns. I don't say that because I think I'm like vastly superior, even though I know I am. I say that because you have all the potential in the world, and most people will never fucking use your brains. You use your head as a hat rack at best. You know, at worst, I don't know. We still have levels of debauchery to get to. Peace. Take it easy.